Frederick the Great once said, "Artillery lends dignity to what would otherwise be a vulgar brawl," and the pride of the fledgling NDF was their captured or surrendered artillery and armor. The First Army was the proud owner and operator of 14 M198 155mm howitzers, 12 M11OA1 self-propelled 203mm or 8-inch guns, 3 British 105mm light howitzers that no one had the slightest idea where they'd come from, and 6 M109A6 self-propelled 155s. The M198s had a standard crew of 9 men but could make do with 5 in a pinch. The M109s were designed for a crew of 4 and needed all 4 bodies. Fortunately for the NDF, America's endless wars in the Middle East had spat out enough disgruntled white veterans from the artillery to provide gun crews for the field pieces. It was a motley collection and scarcely equivalent to the standard TO&E of an American infantry brigade, but it was the only heavy artillery the NDF had. Gare's 2nd and DeBella's 3rd Army had nothing larger than mortars and RPGs. Then there were the rockets, on which Wingfield was placing more hope for this particular mission, i.e. getting his 45,000 men across the river. By hook or crook, the First Army accumulated 16 M270A1 70mm 12-rocket launchers and 18 M142 270mm HIMARS, high-mobility launchers that only packed 6 rockets, but those 6 were larger and had a longer range. Added to those were a number of truck-mounted Katyushas provided by the aforementioned mysterious Russian sympathizers, as well as homemade weapons the NVA had used during the guerrilla campaign, called whiz-bangs. Even the higher-tech rockets were not precision weapons, but used as an area weapon they could be devastating, and one big, heavy-sustained blast was all Wingfield really needed, just enough to keep the enemy's heads down and get his first wave alive across the bridges. Then there were the NDF's captured Stryker armored combat vehicles, M2 and M3 Bradleys with 25mm cannon, and even a few venerable Abrams M1 tanks. Each of these vehicles had been repainted in flat battleship gray with blue, white, and green roundels sprayed on them, or in some cases iron crosses in green or blue. Wingfield was confident that his men and their equipment could defeat the Americans if only he could get them across the river in one piece. At 7:30, Wingfield stood in the airfield's control tower and took a deep breath. "Right, let's get the show on the road," he spoke into his phone. "Let her rip." There was a long moment of silence until a single M110 self-propelled gun in Vancouver's Esther Short Park on the 6th Street side fired the shell that nailed Abdul Malik Johnson in the butt and took off Pettibone's nappy head. Then all hell broke loose from along the Washington side of the river. Cannon, mortar, and rocket fire ripped and slashed through the air and slammed into the Oregon shore, flashing on impact and throwing up columns of smoke and dust and debris. Hartman's guns responded, and a few shells began streaking overhead and crumping into Vancouver along 15th Street and McLaughlin Boulevard. Hartman's gunners apparently thought the bulk of the Nationalists were further back from the shoreline than they were, or else they were overshooting due to bad intel and a lack of spotters. Wingfield watched some of the shells hit far behind them. "If they got satellite surveillance, it don't seem to be doing them much good," he commented. At any rate, they were missing the bulk of the NDF troops who were dug into foxholes and hunkered down in buildings and behind cover along the northern edge of the river. All along the Lewis and Clark Highway, and all along the shore across from Hayden Island, a series of whistles blew loudly, piercing even the thunder of the cannon and rocket fire. Around 22,000 armed men of the first assault wave rose from their dugouts and from the cover of the buildings where they had sheltered, and started walking. With few words, they formed into files and began walking up the on-ramps and across the bridges at a steady pace. The men on the I-5 bridge had the shortest walk, but it was long enough. The aging steel beams and columns of the suspension served as partial cover from the indirect fire, but also had a nasty tendency to send ricochets down into the marching column. The men on the I-205 bridge had the longest walk, well over a mile, and they were the most exposed to enemy fire because their bridge was much more open. But the men on the railroad trestle bridge were at the greatest risk, almost completely exposed to enemy fire. From the Oregon shore, audible even over the crash of the artillery, came the popping of American small arms. Hartman's Marines were opening up on the men on the bridges. The Northwest Republic's new army marched only in the right lanes, leaving the left lanes clear for medevac vehicles that scooted up and down to pull wounded men out of line and rush them back to the MASH units. It had been decided that the first crossing had to be made almost entirely by the men themselves, because of the risk that demolished and burning vehicles might end up blocking the bridge just as effectively as a Bremer wall. On the 205 and I-5 bridges, each column was headed by a single huge Caterpillar front-end loader with crudely shaped armor plating bolted around the cab. The driver was able to see only through slits in the steel that covered his windshield. Both machines had large, heavy steel plates, welded and clamped to their blades to stop rifle and machine gun fire, RPGs and 40mm grenades, and to give the men at least some protection from the direct fire on their front. On the railroad bridge, a special armored and motorized boxcar had been built for the same purpose. The right flank men on the southbound bridge and the left flank on the northbound carried captured police mantlets and homemade shields, slapped together with miscellaneous pieces of bakelite, Kevlar, or steel plating, anything that might stop a bullet. The long lines of men walked stolidly forward, steeling themselves for the artillery they were sure would come, and possibly the explosion and collapse if the special squads had missed any of the explosive charges the Americans had planted on the bridges. Back up in the control tower on Pearson Field, Wingfield put his field glasses back into the case. And they're off to the races. Come on, Shane, we can't see shit from here, so let's get to the command post. They climbed down from the tower, got back into the Humvee, and took off for a brief ride northward. The NDF's command post for the assault on Portland had been set up inside the Marshall House on Officers' Row in the Fort Vancouver National Historic Site just north of the Pearson Field. What had once been General Marshall's main dining room, where he feasted blue-coated officers of the 19th century United States Army, was now in the hands of white men who hoped to defeat the descendants of those officers. A mass of tables and electronic communications gear filled the room, with the biggest map of Portland anyone could find hanging on the wall. A huge blue, white, and green tricolor flag hung along another wall of the dining room, and a number of large-screen televisions had been set up along another wall, most showing split screens and taking feeds from a variety of video cams out in the field, some mounted in stationary positions, and others held by cameramen who were advancing with the troops. Wingfield had a much better overall view of the action from this room than he could get from the river shoreline itself. A number of nationalist soldiers wearing NDF tiger stripes, mostly female in view of Wingfield's ban on women in direct combat for the operation, were manning the electronic gear and talking into microphones, wireless phones, and typing on laptops. All the assault columns are now moving on to the bridges, General, said one of the women soldiers, former NVA volunteer and now NDF Lieutenant Jennifer Campbell, who was in charge of channeling communications between the NDF columns. Jenny was 19 years old, a slim and feminine girl with dark brown hair, a pixie face, and lustrous brown eyes, who looked way too sweet and virginal possibly to be a terrorist. It was a mistake that had cost a number of minorities, policemen, Fat Posen, and FBI agent their lives. General Gare and General DeBella are also beginning their advance inside the city, and Commandants Coyle and Jackson report that their men are out in the streets and are moving to secure their objectives. They say it's pretty heavy going. There are thousands of the enemy jammed into a fairly small area of the city center, and they're coming up against mass fire from entrenched positions. Wingfield nodded. Department's smart enough to maintain a tight interior line sitch and not spread his men out too thin and leave too many gaps we can work our way through, or bop our way through. I want to talk to both field commanders in the city in a minute, so stand by. First things first, how bad's the enemy fire on the bridges? It's there, sir, but our artillery and mortar seem to be keeping most of their heads down, replied another staff officer looking up from her monitor. It's getting over the barricades that will be the problem. None of the Union guns firing on the bridges yet? Asked Wingfield. Negative, sir, not yet. A low, thumping groan shook the floor and was audible even above all the cannon and rocket fire. What the hell was that? Demanded Wingfield. General McCann reports that they've blown the railroad bridge, sir, called out Lieutenant Campbell. Damn, looks like we didn't get all the charges then. Is McCann on the visual? Asked Wingfield. No, you said not, sir. Too much chance of interception since the cell tower's in Portland. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I forgot. Get him for me on a radio. Campbell spoke into a field phone. Badbreaker, this is Sunray. Come in. Badbreaker, this is Sunray. Come in, Badbreaker. Over. Sunray, this is Badbreaker, came Big Jim McCann's voice. I guess you heard that all the way back there? Over. Wingfield took the handset. Badbreaker, this is Sunray. Yeah, we heard. Jim, can you read me? Over. The noise of the artillery and rockets up and down the river shoreline was deafening, even over the radio. Yes, sir, I can, just barely, shouted back McCann. It's kind of loud out here, over. How's it look, Jim? How many men did we lose on the railroad bridge? Over, asked Wingfield. Not too many, replied McCann. They blew the bridge right when we started to move forward, and that shield car took a lot of the blast. Most of the men got off okay. Some damn fool over there across the way was too impatient, I guess. Or maybe he thought the shield vehicle was full of explosives and we were trying to ram them. Couldn't wait for us to get out onto the middle when they would have killed a lot more of us. We were lucky. Over. Either that or our artillery freaked him out, Wingfield responded. Peckerwood white trash criminals ain't supposed to pack field pieces. No getting across that way at all now? Over. No, sir, it's gone. A good 40 feet in the middle is just splinters and stumps now. Over. Right, listen up. Here's what we're going to do. Get you guys on the move and bring your whole division eastward. Follow the railroad tracks and try to stay under cover and out of sight from the Oregon side as best you can, and then cut over on 6th Street. The reports I'm getting indicate that the shell fire isn't too bad. It looks like they're overshooting like hell, plus if they have any rockets, they're not cutting loose with them so far. Send your 1st Brigade across the I-5 after my guys are all on the bridge, and send your 2nd down to the 205 and have them follow Corby Morgan's people across the river there. Those bridges are still up, and we've cleaned all the enemy demolition ordnance off them, I hope, muttered Wingfield under his breath. You copy all that? Over. Copy that, Sunray. Wilco, Bedbreaker out.
Okay, comrades, we're going to have a major troop movement of about 4,000 men crossing the enemy's front, and we need to make sure that they don't get hammered by the heavy stuff, called out Wingfield. Who's hooked up with artillery fire control? A woman soldier raised her hand. I am, sir. Tell our spotters to keep an eagle eye on what's left of the Expo Center and all those shelled-out buildings from last night along Marine and Swift. The Americans can still set up mortars in the rubble where they've got cover. At the first sign of any hostile activity or anything directed against McCann's division or the I-5 bridge, you tell the batteries to redirect and pound the hell out of it. And we'll give them the Katyushas early if we have to. An American shell crashed into one of the other houses on Officers' Row, shaking the Marshall House and causing Wingfield to stagger a bit. And then a second shell hit even closer, the shrapnel breaking some of the windows. Hellfire! Well, better they're shelling us than our men on the bridges, damn fools. And that reminds me, though, how are we doing taking out those Union guns in the park and on the golf course? 2 of them at least are gone, sir, Lieutenant Campbell said. We have a 3-sec spotter doing a Tarzan act up on top of the I-5. She climbed up there onto a beam or something pretty high up where she can see over what's left of the buildings along the river. She's got a set of field glasses, one of our radios she got from somewhere, and a wireless laptop. What she can't see, she can get off Google and CNN. She has a bird's eye view of the Edgewater Golf Course, the Arboretum, and Delta Park East. She's calling into Sea Battery, that's the 155s on the corner of Maritime and Columbia, and also to the Sector 2 Mortar Crew's fire control officer. That's about 25 pieces, 81 mils mostly. She's dropping some heavy shit on those niggers along MLK and all the way down to Bridgeton. She? Shouted Wingfield in exasperation. Judas Priest, did none of you ladies understand my orders to stay out of direct contact with the enemy? I thought I was supposed to be a general or something. Army Council says so anyway. Didn't any of these mutinous gals get the memo? Well, this girl says she's 3rd section and she knows you, sir, replied Campbell. Anyway, she didn't ask me or anybody else here. She just went out there on her own. First we heard of it was when she started calling into Sea Battery a few minutes ago. Well, pipe it up so I can hear whatever the hell she's doing, ordered Wingfield. Campbell turned a dial on the field radio set. Now he could hear the crackling voices on the air.
Nightshade, this is Barnacle Bill, came a male voice. How are those last 3 on that 110 on the golf course? Over.
Barnacle Bill is Sea Battery commander, explained Lieutenant Campbell. He's a former Navy guy. I never would have guessed, muttered Wingfield.
Barnacle Bill, this is Nightshade, came the voice of a girl who sounded like she was about 13 years old.
Lieutenant Emily Postrus Brock was perched on a girder on the center span of the I-5 bridge about 300 feet over the highway, leaning on a suspension cable so she didn't fall while she used her binoculars. A thin girl who still sported teenaged acne, she was wearing a warm shepherd's coat over her camos and a wool pea cap on her head. Her long brown hair hung stringily from beneath the pea cap in the standard braid NVA women had learned was best for action. Her hands were bare and freezing cold since gloved fingers couldn't work the laptop or the radio adequately.
All 3 of your shells boxed him, but you were all short or wide. Over. How many clicks, Nightshade? Over. Sorry, Bill, I don't know what a click is. You were all about 50 yards short one way or the other. Tighten the whole group inward by that much and you'll light him up is all I can say. Does that make any sense? Yeah, we'll tweak it. Incoming in 1 minute. Don't worry, Nightshade, you're doing fine. Over.
Nightshade, muttered Wingfield. Wait a minute, I remember now. Yeah, I do know that girl. I think she's about 17. Oh, this is beautiful. He picked up the mic.
Nightshade, this is Sunray. Refresh my memory. You're that skinny teeny bopper from 3-Sec we pulled out of a mess in that Holy Roller Church up in Seattle back in July before the conference, right? Over. Affirmative, sir, came Nightshade's voice. I remember you. You're the SS guy who looks like Elvis. Over. That's General Elvis, and thank you very much. It was you and your boyfriend, as I recall. Over. Lieutenant Brock, yes, sir. Over. Yeah, you guys are up at the conference in Longview. I know because I saw you two on the front page of USA Today having a slurp session out by the candy machine at that hotel. Over. That was in the line of duty, sir. Over, came the girl's prim response. Yeah, I bet it was. What happened to him? Over, asked Wingfield. I decided I had to make an honest man of him, so we got married, sir. Over, she replied. Is he up there with you? Over. No, sir, he's down below me somewhere. He's with his company on the I-5. Over. Well, young lady, you know you're disobeying orders and you're not supposed to be swinging from the cables like a monkey or how we got up there, but now that you're there, you can make yourself useful. How's it look from where you sit? Over. I can see 2 self-propelled 203s and 2 155s on the golf course that are still firing, plus 2 more 155s that took hits. They're smashed to shit, the girl told him. There's 2 more 203s in Delta Park, and there's another 2 guns in the Arboretum. Can't tell what they are. They're all dug into bunkers with sandbags and Bremer walls all around them. The only way to take them out is if our guys can drop a shell right on top of their heads. Over. They're still not firing on the bridge. Over, asked Wingfield incredulously. No, sir, not yet. They're gunning for you guys on the river, it looks like. Over.
Partman must have more charges planted on the I-5 we didn't find, murmured Jenny Campbell grimly. Wingfield glanced down and saw her clenching her fists until the knuckles were white. Her man's probably on the bridge, too, he thought grimly. If they're gunning for us, they're not doing very well, Wingfield told her. They're shelling Vancouver either because they're lousy shots or because they're just incompetent.
Any sign of anti-aircraft ordnance near those guns? Over. Affirmative, sir. Some Humvees with mounted twin 50s and a couple more with some kind of missile launcher. Over. Okay, Nightshade, keep on doing what you're doing. In a minute or so, I'm going to have Lieutenant Campbell here patch you into Luftwaffe 12 as he and his boys come in and join the show. And I want you to see if you can give him a running commentary on what you see. You especially need to keep track of those anti-aircraft vehicles. Over. Roger, sir. Nightshade out.
Sunray out. At that moment, Nightshade's husband, Lieutenant Cody Brock, aged 18, was marching at the head of his men across the southbound span of the twin I-5 bridge. He was now in command of Company F, 1st Battalion, 4th NDF Infantry Brigade, which consisted of about 80 men, or to be more precise, about 30 men and 50 or so boys Cody's age or younger. His unit was one of the outfits that had been issued with AK-74s. In addition to his weapon, he carried a pack and a field radio. One of the other officers, an Iraq veteran, had advised him to do so. Always carry your own radio, the man said. In case things get hot, you don't want yourself going one way and your communications another. The first outfit in the marching column in the southbound lanes, right behind the front end loader, were the 400-odd Germans of the Panzer Grenadier Brigade, although their armor at the moment consisted purely of the Caterpillar that led the way. Their 3 tanks and several Strykers would follow them across the bridge later, once the obstacles were cleared away. The PGs were commanded by former Bundeswehr officer Conrad Baumgarten, one of the first Germans to find his way to the northwest. For most of the guerrilla war, he had been one of the NVA's top snipers, with a kill score second only to that of the legendary Cat-Eyes Lockhart himself. He had specialized in Jewish targets. Being deployed in New York City on the NVA's Operation Apple Smash had been Baumgarten's slice of pure heaven. Once, on learning that a certain wealthy banker and financier of the Mosaic persuasion was to show up for a cocktail party in a luxury hotel, Baumgarten snuck in early to avoid the security sweeps before the affair, and then lay prone and concealed in a heating duct for 2 days waiting for the moment to take his shot. Almost every man in the unit had done prison time in Germany, sometimes years of it, mostly for crimes of the mind, Holocaust denial, singing a forbidden song from the old days, peacefully protesting against the transformation of Germany into a province of Kurdistan, or simply for the crime of raising their outstretched palm higher than their shoulder in public. They had all found their way by hook or crook to the northwest, seeking out a new fatherland where they could be Germans once again.
"My boys want to be first over the river," Baumgarten had told Wingfield. "We owe these American bastards a debt from 1945. From somewhere or other, rumor had it stolen from the prop stores of a major Hollywood movie studio, the NDF's Quartermaster Corps had somehow obtained a sufficient number of World War II-style coal scuttle helmets for the unit. Only instead of black and white and red shield insignia on the left side of the helmets, the shield was in blue, white, and green. The PG's assigned tanks and strikers bore the old Third Reich Iron Cross symbol, but in green, outlined in blue trim. To the left, the 4th Infantrymen could just crane their necks and see the tops of the heads of a similar force to theirs, marching in the same direction, although in the normally northbound lanes and led by a similar armored bulldozer. This was Colonel Mike Davis's corps, attacking parallel with them on the other bridge. They faced the same kind of entrenched enemy barricades they'd have to break through on the Oregon side. Cody Brock's company sergeant major was a summer soldier, another Iraq and Iran veteran. He was a chunky, bearded, middle-aged construction worker with a red boozer's nose from Kelso, Washington, named Bernard Snow. Sergeant Snow maintained the old military tradition wherein Top actually ran the outfit for some kid officer, and so long as the kid didn't meddle, Snowy graciously pretended that he was actually in charge. It helped that Cody had been a Northwest volunteer and proven his mettle many times over during the guerrilla war, which the older man knew and respected. Today, Foxtrot and Golf companies were mingled together in the column. Cody and the G Company commander marched at the head of the line, while the two respective CSMs herded up the rear, watching for stragglers and wounded. Cody found himself walking beside the CO of G Company, a tall and muscular young man in his 20s with longish auburn hair and a light, thin mustache, packing an M16 slung over one shoulder. "I saw you at the briefing. I'm Cody Brock." "Jason Stockdale," came the reply. "UNVA?" asked Brock. "Oh yeah, Montana, Missoula Brigade. Before that, I did a year with the regulators until that cock-up in Helena." "You knew Jack Smith?" "I did. Good man. I was with the column that went into Helena that night. I made it back. A lot didn't." While they spoke, bullets from the Oregon shore were whining overhead and ricocheting off the steel columns over their heads with a clang. "How green are your guys?" asked Cody. "All my NCOs are volunteers, but most of my company is just out of the depot at Centralia," replied Stockdale. "Got here 2 days ago. Got a few Middle East vets, but some of them aren't even old enough to drive." The bullets from the Oregon shore whipping and zinging over their heads began to increase in number, and more bullets could be heard slapping into the sides of the mantlets carried by the men along the right file of the column. Instinctively, the NDF troops hunched down and leaned forward as if they were walking into a driving rainstorm. Stockdale turned around and yelled at his men, "Keep walking and pay no mind, boys. We're just out for a stroll. Anybody gets hit, if they're alive, call for medevac, and if they're dead, take their ammo and rations and leave them by the side of the bridge. Don't worry, it'll be our turn to give it to them hot in a few minutes." Somewhere ahead there was an explosion, shouting and screams. Some kind of grenade had been lobbed or fired into the marching men. Yet the column moved forward. The NDF had been frankly worried that untried men and teenage boys with 3 weeks of training, however strong in spirit, would break and run under fire. It wasn't happening. "You married?" asked Cody, desperately trying to sound casual and pass the time as if they weren't being fired on. He looked down just in time to step over the bleeding dead body of a young German who lay face down on the asphalt. To his left, medevac trucks and SUVs scooted up and down the bridge, taking bullets, picking up wounded men, and running them back to the medical units in the rear. Hitting and running during the guerrilla war had been one thing. Marching headlong into the enemy guns was turning out to be another. "Gonna be married if we both make it through," said Stockdale. "Jenny and I decided that if one of us doesn't, then the other deserves a clean, fresh start with no baggage. She's back there in the ops center working on a laptop or something. As soon as this bridge is safe and we've taken out the trash and moved those damn Burma walls down there out of the way, she'll be driving a truck across." "You?" "Yeah, my lady and I had an NVA military wedding on the night of the 22nd up at Longview. We were in the delegation to the treaty talks. Seemed like a good way to round off a great day. Emily's supposed to be back at HQ now doing something on a computer as well, but if I know her, she's found some way to get across the river ahead of us." "I agree with Wingfield's call on that," said Stockdale. "Using women as guerrilla fighters during the revolt was a necessary evil. Sending them marching headlong into the enemy guns to be slaughtered like this was goddamn Verdun is something else. We have to start proving the Republic has better standards of moral decency than we've been living with for the past century." Jenny wasn't happy about it, but she understands. She's a soldier and she obeys orders. "You meet her in the volunteers?" asked Brock. "Oh, we knew each other from the sandbox back in Missoula. Well, she was in the sandbox anyway when I first saw her. I'm 9 years older than her." My lady was a third section spook at age 16, said Cody. How the hell did you hook up with some 3-sec Matahari? Asked Stockdale in surprise. Out on a tickle with Bobby Bell's crew up in Seattle, explained Cody. I pistol whipped her and she tried to stick a switchblade in my eye. That was our first date. Long story. Something snapped overhead and exploded with a flash, the concussion making him stagger. What the fuck was that? Yelled Cody. 40 mil grenade, I imagine, said Stockdale, shaking his head. Heim. They'll get the range better as we get closer. Well, at least we haven't had the bridge blown out from under us yet. In the NDF command post in Marshall House, Wingfield heard the radio chatter of the incoming aircraft. Sunray, this is Luftwaffe 12. We're over Scappoose now. ETA 3 minutes. Come back. His voice was distinctly south in the mouth. CB lingo, must be a trucker as well as a pilot, said Wingfield. Luftwaffe 1-2, this is Sunray. Our men are about halfway across the I-5. Luftwaffe 9er, where are you at? Over. Sunray, this is Luftwaffe 9. We're over Troutdale coming in from the east. ETA also 3 minutes. Over. Luftwaffe 9er, you take the 205. You know what to do. Over. Roger, Sunray. Luftwaffe 9 out. Luftwaffe 1-2, I'm going to patch you into a young lady named Nightshade who's doing a human fly act on the top span of the I-5. She's spotting for the Boom Boom Boys, and she has her eye on some AA waiting for you guys. Meet her on Channel 6, over. Roger, Sunray, switching to 6. The pilot did so. This is Luftwaffe 12. Boss man tells me I'm supposed to hook up with a chick called Nightshade on this channel. Come back. You got her, 12, came Lieutenant Emily Brock's voice. Where you at, honey? Come back. I'm up on top of the I-5 bridge here, checking out the spectacular view. You got some Clintonista anti-aircraft weapons moving up the 99 on-ramp onto the interstate, couple of Humvees with twin 50s, and one with some kind of missile weapon. Looks like they know you're coming. Better get them before they get you. Over. Gotcha, sweet thing. You, that's gotta be a Texan, said Nightshade. Broken Bow, Oklahoma, actually, replied the pilot. Little Dixie feller, name's Roy. What's yours besides Nightshade? Back off, Cletus. I'm a newlywed. Just make sure you don't drop anything nasty on the wrong side of those barricades, demanded Emily. My blushing groom is down there somewhere. Sounds like he's a lucky guy, Nightshade. We'll give him a hand and see if we can't get you two lovebirds back together. This is Sunray, interjected Wingfield. I know NDF training isn't up to speed yet, but didn't anyone teach you guys proper RTO procedure? Over. Sir, this time last month I was hauling plastic crap up from Mexico in an 18-wheeler for Houston Mighty Mart, chuckled the pilot. Don't worry, we'll get her done. Luftwaffe 12, out. Down on the bridge, Cody said, Here come the flyboys. Over the noise of the shells and the small arms fire, they could hear the rumble and thrum of engines. Looking to their right, the marching men could see a flight of several dozen small propeller-driven aircraft shooting upriver toward them at speed. Some painted in camouflage with NDF roundels on their wings and fuselages, and some still in their civilian colors. There were Cessnas, Beechcraft Bonanzas, and Musketeers, Pipers, twin and single engines. Anything the fledgling Northwest Air Force could convert into a bomber or a strafer for ground support. They bore crudely clamped and spot-welded machine guns on their wings, and all carried some kind of Semtex or gelignite bomb under their belly, sometimes a matched pair. These were homemade ordnance hastily turned out in improvised munitions factories in the nationalist-held areas to the north, made of anything from steel and cast-iron pipe to PVC to old aluminum beer kegs. Now, some of the bombs were so heavy that the small aircraft lugging them wobbled in flight. Hopefully they would at least detonate on impact. The planes were flying low, whipping over the burning and smoking rubble of the railway bridge and heading straight toward the Oregon end of I-5. From her perch on the steel beam, Emily Brock got on her radio. Luftwaffe 12, this is Nightshade. You got more problems, Roy. Here come the gunships. Looks like Apaches. 3 of the bastards. Over. I see him, Nightshade, answered the Oklahoman. Keep your head down up there, honey. The shit's about to hit the fan. The USMC Apache helicopters swung lowly and lazily over the Oregon end of the bridge and opened fire with their 30mm chain guns. Several of the NDF planes simply melted into shards and the pieces shot over the bridge and plummeted into the river. The nationalist aircraft kept on coming, and in the blink of an eye a Cessna 177 detached itself from the flight and hurled itself headlong into one of the Apaches with a crash and a deafening roar. Both aircraft exploded like a second sun, and the whole inferno dropped like a stone onto the Union side of the interstate. From the bridge, Cody and Stockdale saw a column of fire shoot up into the sky, and even over all the other noise, they could hear the screams of burning men. The TV screens in the NDF command center showed it all clearly. "My God, sir, that was a suicide pilot!" cried Jenny Campbell in horror. "Negatory, Lieutenant, that was a drone," Wingfield told her with satisfaction. "There are 30 aircraft in Flight 12, but only 20 of them are manned. 10 of those planes are remote-controlled drones being flown by the co-pilot in one of the other aircraft, kind of like a giant kid's toy. We didn't fancy trying to take on gunships in a full-on dogfight with nothing but civvy prop jobs, so we gave ourselves an edge. A brainchild of Dr. Joseph Cord, and a young techie volunteer type who uses the name of Dr. Doom, I believe." The massed planes of Luftwaffe 12 shot over the bridge and headed eastward, following Nightshade's directions, straight for the Union gun emplacements beneath the bridge. Some of their bombs released and dropped onto the golf course in the Arboretum, crumping and echoing as they exploded. Several more drone aircraft, including a Beechcraft Musketeer and an old Piper Cub, were hurtled into the earth and exploded in columns of fire. "How we doing down there, sweet thing?" demanded Roy over the radio. "It's a mess, and it's hard for me to see, but looks like you got 2 of them at least," she told him, peering through her field glasses. "One in the Arboretum lit up like a Christmas tree, and one on the golf course looks like the barrel blew off." The 2 remaining Apaches whirled and gave chase as the Northwest flight continued heading east, their chain guns and rocket launchers spitting and hissing. "Bow to you, partners, bow to your corners, now it's time to do-see-do," yelled the Oklahoma flight commander into his radio. The remaining airplanes split into 2 smaller squadrons, shot up in the air on a sharp climb, and one after another performed an Immelman roll, leveling out and racing westward back downriver. They roared over the top of the I-5 and over the smoking wreck of the railway bridge, and then about a mile downriver they did the same thing, climbing and rolling, reversing direction and leveling back eastward to make their second run. "Hot damn, it worked!" yelled Roy into his radio with glee. "Those sheet metal guys back at Chehalis who beefed up our struts and wings knew their shit. Doesn't look like we lost a single plane." The Apaches tried to follow, but their pilots were confused. They'd never fought against massed fixed-wing aircraft before. One squadron of NDF planes attacked the helicopters with their wing-mounted machine guns, filling the sky with a curtain of bullets. The Apache's armor held up well against the round strikes, but even so, helicopters that are flying evasive maneuvers find it hard to fire their own weapons. The other wing zeroed in on the American positions behind the Bremer walls barring the bridge. A dozen bombs hurtled into the enemy behind the barricade, and 2 more drone planes crashed right into the moving anti-aircraft vehicles, the explosions hurtling fragments of men and equipment into the air. The Apaches whirled about and opened fire again with their 30s, and more Luftwaffe planes came apart or caught fire and spun out of control. But a second drone smashed into a gunship, and the 2 flaming wrecks went spinning down into the river like a fireworks cartwheel. The last remaining Apache's pilot apparently decided he'd had enough of this sudden hornet's nest. He banked sharp left, turned on a dime, and ran. Then up ahead, at the end of the bridge, the armored bulldozer reached the Union barricade and slammed into it, revving its engine and trying to push the concrete Bremer wall aside. The driver did not succeed, but he did knock the berm over onto its back, and he came to rest perched on top of it roughly at a 30-degree angle. "Sunrise, this is Eisenkreuz," shouted the Panzer Grenadiers Colonel Baumgarten into his radio. "We have contact with the enemy position." "Right then, let's play Delmar Parkman a tune on Stalin's organ," snapped Wingfield back in the command center. "Tell the Katyusha batteries to open fire." Cody and Jason Stockdale could hear noise and shouting ahead, and the sound of more grenades going off. Then dozens of flaming rockets from the Washington side of the river screamed past them on both sides of the bridge and overhead. From somewhere up the line came the command, "Down! Everybody down!" The column of troops crouched down on their knees as rocket after rocket slammed into the Oregon side all along Swift Highway and Martin Luther King Boulevard, a curtain of fire and smoke and debris shaking the bridge under their feet. "Holy shit!" yelled Jason Stockdale in awe. At the barricade, Comrade Baumgarten stood up at the head of his men and roared, "Sturmabteilung vorwärts!" The PGs had a company of stormtroopers in the old sense of the term. Even before the National Socialist campsite during the First World War, there had been soldiers in special units of the German army, specially armed and trained, who had been the first over the top and the first into the enemy trenches. It was from these that Hitler had taken the name of his own SA. The Panzer Grenadiers had developed such a unit of almost 100 men, specially to go over the top in this one crucial operation, and they now executed a maneuver they had been practicing for a week. Several grenadiers leaped up on top of the stranded Caterpillar, armed with RPGs and an M60 machine gun, and began firing along the top of the Bremer walls at the Americans crouched on some kind of parapet behind them, while others hurled grenade after grenade over the walls. 6-man squads ran out forward carrying long rectangles of plywood and rubber matting that they had lugged with them across the bridge, which they hooked together with steel brackets at each end, thus producing 3 long ramps. These they humped forward and mounted against the top of the Bremer walls. Then the rest of the Germans charged up the ramps and leaped over the barricades, shouting and shooting. "Up! Up!" the shout came relayed up the line. "The PGs are over! Forward! Move out!" Cody Brock and Jason Stockdale stood up and signaled to their own men, moving back in among them to count heads and make sure that they were all still together and on their feet. "Foxtrot!" shouted Cody. "Listen up! Our German comrades are over the wall. Let's go give them a hand." The men yelled and cheered in excitement. He found his CSM. "Snowy, how are we doing?" "We're in pretty good shape, sir, all things considered," said Snow. "That kid Kenny Burgess took around in the head. He's gone." Cody turned around and shook his fist at the smoking carnage on the Oregon side of the river. "You killed Kenny! You bastards!" he yelled. "Anybody else?" "Something fell on Roback. He's gone too," said Snow. "Landers and Pataki got hit, but they fell out and should be on a medevac by now." "Okay, when we get over the barricade and we cut through whatever they've got waiting for us, our battalion guides right and goes down the Pier Street off-ramp to the street, then east into Delta Park to take out any of those guns that are still firing, and after that we go with Donner's Corps to move on the airport," Cody told him. "Bressler's people are driving towards City Hall. If I go down, you've got Foxtrot. You take my radio and report to Captain Hatcher. His handle is Red Eye and we're Tigger." "Got it," said Snow. "Let's move out." "Papa Golfs are over, sir," said Jenny Campbell back in the command center. "Colonel Davis has breached the northbound barricade. Their bulldozer pushed one of the Bremer walls over the side of the bridge and into the river, and they're getting into it hand to hand now. Davis says that there's no actual military behind there, just those goddamn loyal Leaguers and Oregon watchmen." "No Marines or Rangers?" asked Wingfield in puzzlement. "Partman left an important position like that to half-assed amateur auxiliaries?" "From what it sounds like, just from the chatter, sir, he's using most of his Marines along Sunset Boulevard," said Jenny. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense," muttered Wingfield, ruminating. "Bobby Bells and the whole Third Army are going right for his throat at City Hall, and I guess Partman figured any old scumbag sitting behind those Bremers could just sweep the bridges, and in a narrow field of fire like that they could hold us, like Thermopylae. Trouble is, those John Wayne wannabe yahoos ain't no damn Spartans." On the southbound I-5, the column lurched forward again at a slow but steady walk. Cody caught up with Jason Stockdale again. "How's Golf Company doing?" he asked. 3 men dead and 6 wounded. You guys?" 2 dead and 2 wounded, Cody told him. "Is it just me or is the ground fire slacking off?" "It's slacking off," replied Stockdale. "The planes and the rockets did a number on those jarheads." The NDF planes were still buzzing and whirling overhead like a swarm of angry hornets, swooping in and strafing at unseen targets at the Oregon end of the I-5 and along the shore below. "Damn," swore Cody, looking up. "More choppers." "Yeah, but look, they're ours," said Stockdale. The bridge barricades and enemy positions along the shoreline were now being attacked by the 2nd Nationalist Air Wave, a mixed bag of helicopters sporting blue, white, and green roundels, with M60 gunners firing from the doors or from weapons mounted on the skids of the belly of the choppers. There were 2 commandeered American Blackhawks with door gunners blasting away, and another 2 Seattle police helicopters, but most were civilian models, including Portland's own Channel 7 News and Traffic Copter with its original TV logo. The first of the 4th reached the concrete and sandbag barricade, and Cody swore softly to himself as he saw at least a dozen dead German troopers in tiger stripes and coal scuttle helmets lying on the ground or sprawled on top of the Caterpillar and over the top of the Bremer walls. They mounted the ramps, and when they reached the top, they saw that the Americans had built scaffolding parapets along the south side to use as firing positions, most of which were knocked over or twisted by bomb blasts. Before them stretched the elevated Interstate 5 going into Oregon, a hellish scene of burning vehicles and wrecked aircraft, oily black smoke, and on the asphalt a carpet of dead bodies. They clambered down from the parapets and kept on moving forward, stepping over the burned and mangled remains, sometimes slipping in the blood. "Wait a minute," said Stockdale, staring down at the ragged enemy corpses. "These aren't jarheads." In front of them was a dead black man, his head covered with a blue bandana and clenching a short-pump shotgun. Stockdale kicked him over on his stomach. The corpse was also wearing a black hoodie with the iron-on letters POC. "Portland, Oregon Crips," exclaimed Cody. "These are goddamn nigger gangbangers." "Looks like the mighty United States of America is really scraping the bottom of the barrel," said Stockdale with a sneer. As they continued to move off the bridge, the two young officers looked over to their right, where they saw a platoon of 30 or 40 SS-tabbed men in tiger stripes hooking ropes onto their waist harnesses and preparing to rappel off the guardrail of the interstate and down to the ground. A tall officer whose headgear was missing was shouting and gesticulating at his men. He bore an odd resemblance to former President Bill Clinton, although a much younger version. He seemed to be shouting in a mixture of Italian and pidgin English. "Avanti, ragazzi," he yelled. "Let's go. We no got all day. Libertà!" "Who the devil is that?" asked Cody curiously. "Hell, who knows," said Stockdale. "We got all kinds of white folks coming here looking for a homeland." "Speaking of which," he added, nodding to their left, there they saw Colonel Conrad Baumgarten of the Panzergrenadiers, standing to attention in the middle of the bullet and bomb-shredded highway, the handset in one hand and a broom-handled Mauser pistol in the other. One side of his body was soaked with blood. They couldn't tell if it was his own or someone else's. Baumgarten was on the horn with the NDF command center in the Marshall House. His voice rang through the control room. "Sunray, this is Eisenkreuz. I have the honor to report that the First Army of the Republic is now in Portland." Wild cheering and applause broke out in the command center. And then again when Lieutenant Jenny Campbell shouted out, "Sir, General Morgan reports his corps has stormed the barricades on the 205. They're moving off the bridge and into the city." Wingfield spoke up when the noise finally died down. "Right, send this to all units and make sure you use frequencies and online channels that all the goddamn news media can pick up on as well. Inform them that we have defeated and overrun the enemy on the bridges, and we are advancing on all fronts into Portland. Remind them of my Operational Order Number 5, issued at dawn today. White Unionists, military or otherwise, are to be given one chance, and one chance only, to throw down their weapons and surrender, if the tactical situation makes it possible to do so without endangering NDF personnel. Anyone, man, woman, or child with skin the color of shit is to be shot on sight. They had their chance to leave our country over the past 5 years, and it's time the Northwest Republic made it clear that we goddamn well mean what we say. This land is now whites only." Deafening cheers rang through the command center. He turned to his adjutant. "Come on, Shane, let's take ourselves a little constitutional over there in the City of Roses." By midnight that night, it was effectively over, although the mopping up would take several more days. General Carter Wingfield and Captain Shane Ryan stood on the street in front of the blackened and bullet-shattered 4-story Italian Renaissance facade of Portland's City Hall. Around them stood most of the generals who had taken the city. Robert Gare and Billy Baskine from the 2nd Army, Robert Bobby Bells DeBella and Zach Hatfield from the 3rd Army, Big Jim McCann and John Corbett Morgan from the 1st. They were staring down at 4 dead U.S. Marines lying on the sidewalk in front of them. "It happened about 15 minutes ago," said Zach Hatfield, who was wearing his famed and photogenic broad-brimmed hat and his long gray duster from his guerrilla days with the NVA out on the North Oregon coast, with his Winchester rifle of Sunset Beach fame slung over his shoulder. "I just missed it. Partman and these other guys, his staff officers, I guess, must have known that America's number was up, and so they did the old Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid trick. They came charging out the door with their weapons blazing, and our German comrades returned the favor." "Stupid damn jarhead," muttered Wingfield, nudging the bullet-riddled corpse with his boot toe. "Now the Americans will have a legend of their own out of all this mess. The only one they'll be able to conjure up out of these last 5 sorry years of torture and tyranny, I think, but they're a sorry bunch and they shouldn't even have this one. They don't deserve it." "How's it looking for us casualty-wise, Carter?" asked DeBella. Wingfield sighed. "Better than we had any right to expect, I suppose, but I can tell you this, Bobby. We've lost more of our comrades in this one day than we lost during the past 5 years of the NVA revolt." Someone had brought up a sound truck, and suddenly a blare of trumpets split through the black and freezing northwest night. Around them, the surviving German troopers leaped to their feet and began savagely to sing along. Those boys damn sure sing better than Parkman did, said Corby Morgan with a grin. 3 days later, Jason Stockdale and Jenny Campbell were finally able to break away from their duties and take some personal time. Stockdale was newly discharged from the NDF medical unit, which had taken over the Providence Medical Center. Along with the remaining staff there and in other hospitals around the city, the Republic's military medical personnel were now treating thousands of wounded NDF troops, white civilian casualties, and wounded white Union fighters as well without differentiation. There were no non-white wounded. Wingfield's order had been carried out, and a dark skin was now a death warrant in Portland. Stockdale's G Company had been cleaning the last of the city's Mexican gangbangers out of a warehouse, and he'd taken a 9mm bullet on his Kevlar vest at close range, which had cracked a couple of ribs. He had to hold Jenny close to him very gingerly. They stood on the roof of the city hall, which up until recently had been flying the last American flag in the Northwest. They were watching the sun rise in the cold morning air. "It's over. I can't believe it. It's over," whispered Jenny, crying softly. "All these years of fear and blood and death, and now it's over. I want to go back to Montana, Jace. I want to go home." "You got it, babe," he said, kissing her hair. "We did it, Jen. We did it. Now it's over, and we're free. Now it's time for us to begin."